children.
Children.
Children. Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children.
Children. Children. Children.
Children have become a really hot topic in the news, whether it's for being shot in a school, whether it's for prioritizing our military budget over feeding them, and especially when it comes to what we're teaching them and how teaching them history is bad. Children are a really common topic on the campaign trail. They're really common topics among political leaders and school leaders. But in my experience as a teacher, I've seen more often than not students be treated as less than equal to adults, to some of their peers. In a lot of ways, children are not people.
I hate to spoil your fun, but there's no such thing as rights, okay? They're imaginary. We made them up, like the boogeyman.
Welcome back to The Quiet Part. Today I want to talk about the rights of children and the many ways I as a teacher have seen them be violated. And speaking of me being a teacher, I've just completed my first year of teaching. Thank you, I know, thank you. I didn't die. But I've personally seen a lot. I've seen students be totally mistreated as if they simply weren't the same species as the adults around them. And I found that to be deeply frustrating. So, to talk more about how our system represents that children are not equal, they are not people, I want to grasp at the root. Let's look at the highest law of the land. Let's look at some Supreme Court cases. First up, I want to talk about Tinker versus Des Moines. Tinker versus Des Moines was a Supreme Court case in which a group of students got together and began wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War. This was a really hot topic historically in the US at the time, like a very hot topic. And the principal of the school at this time decided that he would threaten kids with being suspended just for having these armbands on, quietly demonstrating their disagreement with the Vietnam War. Now, to start with this, I want to talk about how historically the United States has established that students and children have some amount of rights. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court's majority ruled that neither students nor teachers shed their constitutional rights to freedom of speech or expression at the schoolhouse gate. The court at the time took the position that school officials could not prohibit only on the suspicion that the speech might disrupt the learning environment. Now, it was a 7-2 decision. This wasn't 100% agreement. The dissent argued that the First Amendment does not grant the right to express any opinion at any time. Students attend school to learn, not teach others by expressing. At least, this is, once again, the opinion of those dissenting. So, at some point in American history, the United States ruled that children have rights to free speech, like almost equally to that of adults. But in an odd parallel to what's going on right now in terms of Roe v. Wade, and in a terrible counter parallel to what happened with Plessy versus Ferguson and then eventually Brown versus Board, we've seen rights get rolled back. So let's take a look now at Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer. In Hazelwood versus Kohlmeyer, the context was this. Students in a Journalism 2 class at Hazelwood East High School in St. Louis, Missouri, wrote stories about their peers' experiences with some more complex topics like teen pregnancy and the impacts of divorce. Now, at the time, the principal did not like this, so he deleted the pages that they included in their little journal. They were making what was effectively a school newspaper in this class, but it was contained. It wasn't super broad into the public. But the principal found it was necessary, in his mind, to censor these students' work because they talked about complex topics that I assume the principal didn't find comfortable or appropriate for school. And now, you would think, based on the previous court case, that the Supreme Court would rule in favor of the students' rights to freedom of expression. And this is not the case. The decision is as follows. In a 5-3 ruling, the U.S. Supreme Court held that the principal's actions did not violate the students' rights to free speech. The court noted that the paper was sponsored by the school, and as such, the school had a legitimate interest in preventing the publication of articles that it deemed appropriate. So, we've seen the Supreme Court established that students have rights, and then, this court case was in 1988, they rolled them back. They're like, nah, here's the thing. And I'm going to communicate this to you as a teacher who has seen this, who understands the administration of this, and as someone who's just read up on the topic. Here's the truth about this. Here's the quiet part when it comes to students' rights. Schools and the government will always prioritize the functioning of the school over the rights of the students in these kinds of cases. If you can argue in any way, shape, or form that what a student is doing is getting in the way of learning, you can say, okay, your rights are on the table now. We can take them away and limit them. In this case, with this 1988 case with Kohlmeyer, they ended up censoring the student paper. Censorship, which is a thing that, like, is not supposed to happen, right? If this were a traditional adult publication in the absence of corruption, let's say it's some really reputable publisher like Reuters or something, or NPR, or just any super reputable source, censorship would be a no-go. That wouldn't happen unless it were like some sort of classified government documents. But generally, censorship would not be happening if these were adults writing these papers. So here's the thing. Why is this acceptable? Children's rights are somehow on the table. We can take them away, we can modify them, we can say that they're less than us, and that doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that's a look at the Supreme Court cases. Let's talk modern news. Let me give you a more modern example of ways in which I think the well-being of children is not being prioritized. Because once again, the core topic of this discussion right now is how does the government and how do schools not appreciate the humanity of children and students? How is that not represented? How are we not seeing equality? How are we not seeing fair human treatment of students? Well, here's a pretty quick way to get this point across. At the beginning of the pandemic in 2020, the United States expanded its food program for school lunches. By the way, let's just start with this simple thing. Students shouldn't have to go into debt to eat school lunch. I hope that isn't complex, but before 2020, and I have personal experience with this, which I'll talk about before getting to some of this data, this article, here's the thing. Children should deserve to eat. And my argument for this is pretty straightforward, but here's the thing. This isn't like this is not my perspective as a teacher with a whole first year done. This is just like my interpretation of morality and of the U.S. Constitution and of the founders of the Constitution to the extent which their opinions are still relevant in the modern day. Here's the thing. You've heard the phrase, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? Those are things that are supposed to be protected and guaranteed in our government. Remind me, food is necessary for staying alive. and here's the thing, like, we can talk about the glorification of children and how, in a way, that kind of also dehumanizes children. We over-glorify them to some extent. But here's the thing, let's take that glorification in mind, that people want to protect children, it's an instinct, it's a good thing, I think it's moral, it's great, okay? You'd want to feed them, correct? You'd want to give them the life. You'd want them to be able to eat. And you're mandating that they have to go to school. School is compulsory in the United States. It has to be provided to some certain age. Usually most states say up to 16, and then you can opt out. You have to go to school in some way, shape, or form. And when you're at school, for some reason, food is not on the table. You don't have to be provided food. Instead, a common practice in the United States is students going into lunch debt because they can't afford food. So they have to go negative into their school account just to get a meal that day. Now, here's the awesome thing. I don't know who or why or what movement. I don't care because feeding kids is a good thing. In 2020, we expanded our free lunch program because some kids already got free lunch. Lower income kids got free lunch. But I don't think that's good enough. I think it should be universal. It should not be off the table. The food should always be on the table. In 2020, we expanded the program such that everyone gets free school lunch. And when I say everyone, there are some weird caveats. You could talk about private schools, you could talk about certain kinds of charter schools, but the vast majority of government-run and publicly funded schools had free lunch for everyone throughout the duration of the pandemic. And guess what's going to happen in a few days from now on June 30th, whenever this is posted, June 30th, 2022? We're taking the free lunch away for some reason. Here's a comparison. okay? Here's a comparison. The school lunch program at the time costed $11 billion, which is a stupid amount of money. That's massively significant. But the United States GDP is ridiculous in comparison. That's only a sliver of our government funds. Now, compare that to the proposed military spending for the year on the right. And then, here's the real kicker. The school lunch program only costed $11 billion more to run, and yet our proposed increase in military spending for that year, just the increase, not the total amount, because we're almost at $1 trillion a year on military. The proposed increase alone, we could have just left it where it was. The proposed increase was $45 billion. So, there is a clear priority here in context of how our government is allotting its monies for people. It is literally putting $45 billion more towards war instead of just keeping our $11 billion for feeding kids school lunches. Okay? That is how children are not people in context of education and the American government at large. So far, we've just talked about like bigger, broad, root kind of causes and more so representations of how the principles of the education system and the American government are totally misguided right now. The principles are wrong. They are not representative of what I think most people would agree with. That kids deserve food, that kids can probably speak freely, like who's it going to hurt? Let's talk about more personal stories, okay? So let's get story time. Get a blanket, get some popcorn. Let's talk about some of my personal experiences as a student, and then I'll try to reflect on some of my experiences as a teacher on the other side. So let's start with my student story, and this one is really interesting. We have to roll back to 2015, and I was a sophomore in high school at the time, okay? And at the time, I had a girlfriend. And of course, like any other teenagers, we would walk each other to class as much as possible. We'd walk each other. We'd meet each other up with our schedules and like try to walk with each other as much as possible. And I don't know if this was an intentional experiment or this just ended up happening and I kind of dug my nails into it. But I had a shirt at the time, and there was nothing vulgar on it. Instead, it was just a sleeveless shirt, which is ironic because my arms were twigs at the time. Don't know what I was trying to do. Did not look good. I was like 12. I was 15 or 16. And I had a sleeveless shirt that was comfortable. Like, I just liked it. I think it was like an anime shirt or something, of course. And I would wear that to school. And I'd walk around. It could be any season, by the way. Summer, winter, doesn't matter. I wore all the time. I could walk around, walk my girlfriend to class, and nothing would happen. But it's 100% a violation of school dress code. Like, absolutely. It just says don't do that. It says no sleeveless shirts at all. And yet I'm doing that all the time, and I'm not even like a big muscular guy who like maybe that'd be better for some stupid reason. I was just walking around with a sleeveless shirt, and I never ever heard anything from an administrator or a teacher. I would look teachers in their faces. I was like good friends with teachers at that point in my academic career, and I never got disciplined ever. Now, once again, me and my girlfriend walking through the school, she is wearing her own sleeveless shirt, and like once, she's wearing like a sleeveless like crop top or blouse kind of thing, and like we passed like one teacher and instantly, bam, dress coded. Like, that's it. Game over. And I'm like, what? I do this all the time, and you don't care that I do it. There's clearly something going on here. And I found that really creepy, really weird. It was a female teacher that dress coded her, but, like, it's still weird. This is a bit of a side note, but, like, teachers just shouldn't be looking. First off, like, the only way you notice is because you're looking. You really shouldn't be, okay? I don't pay attention to any of that as a teacher. Like, I literally don't even notice. My kids will dye their hair like green to red, and I'll be like, did you get taller? I won't notice. Like, I'm not paying attention to the physiological characteristics of my students. I'm not the school nurse. That's not my business. So that was a thing I experienced as a young man. It's like, well, this is weird. I have rights. I can, like, wear whatever I want. No sleeves. I can be comfy. And yet my girlfriend 100% cannot. And I found that very wrong and very weird, because the average adult woman can walk down any street much less clothed than that, and there is no legal repercussion. There is no systematic method by which that person faces judgment or consequences for expressing themselves freely in that way, because it's a guaranteed right. And yet, in the case of a school, suddenly those rights are off the table, along with lunch, because apparently kids don't deserve to eat. So that is my my personal story as a student and the ways in which I've seen students' rights be limited. Dress code is so stupid. It is a terrible idea. But the argument ties back to the same argument as in the case of Supreme Courts. It comes down to the effective running of a school. Schools have to be ran like businesses. They have to be run, and they have to be smooth and operative and effective, and nothing can get in the way. And if a girl shows her shoulders, suddenly school is impossible to do. The teachers are so ineffectual that a mere shoulder brings us down to our knees. That's kind of fucking stupid, isn't it? Yeah, we all agree that's dumb, okay? They're also children. They're like 15-year-olds. Literally, I was 15. His girlfriend was 15. That's so weird. None of that should be the case. And any school that genuinely thinks that a shoulder or cleavage or a stomach or anything like that is going to genuinely make their school not run effectively is lying. Okay, they are lying. What they are doing is putting the rights of students below the wants of parents. And maybe teachers too, and maybe the greater government and community. I don't know, and I don't care. I don't care that it might be that parents don't want their kids dressing that way, and the school wants to ally with parents to not face lashback and lawsuits or something. I don't care that it's the fact that parents are being uplifted. That's not my problem. My problem is that children are being brought down. Their rights are being demoted and devalued. And I experienced that. I got to watch it live as a student. And nowadays, I get to watch it live as a teacher all the time, and I hate it. So that dress code story is not where it started becoming apparent to me as a child that I wasn't being treated as a person, that other kids weren't being treated like people. Unfortunately, the realization goes back a lot further, and I could say that this is around, I think, 2nd or 3rd grade, and it was pretty bad, especially around 6th grade. So the school lunch story is very personal to me, because when I was younger, my family was at times on the borderline between food insecure. So effectively, I had a lot of experiences growing up where I would go to get my food at the school lunch line and I just didn't have any money. My parents couldn't write a big check for it ahead of time, and I couldn't ask them for $5 at the end of the month because Dad hadn't gotten paid yet, and I just wouldn't eat. Or I'd have to do what a lot of kids do, still do, and now they will do a whole lot more now that this is being rolled back. I'd have to have my lunch go negative. I'd have to have my freaking lunch account go into debt, which is so ironic and sad and, I don't know, postmodern, because that just got me ready for college debt. Another way in which education is just like, you don't need help. you don't get rights to an education. Not that college education is that necessary always, but it was funny that I was going into debt as a little kid to get ready for going into debt as an adult. But the hardest part emotionally, and we can talk about the physiological effects. Let's talk about other borderline kids that are not able to get food consistently. The effect that has on your physiology is ridiculous and stupid. It's unbelievable. Okay, we're talking effects on growth, hormone balances. We're talking mental health. And you know what's really important, and why my argument that kids should just be treated really well as people. They should be given food. They should be allowed to talk how they want. They should be able to dress how they want. The truth is, the quiet part that no one else is saying is that instead of freedoms getting in the way of educations, freedom is the way of education. Kids having rights is only a good thing, okay? Kids having more rights can only be a good thing, because if kids have access to food, they won't be asleep in class. They won't be tired in class. They won't have sudden mood swings because their insulin's going crazy. They're not going to have these crazy changes in behavior. They're not going to be completely out of it. If you look at Maslow's good old hierarchy of needs, it's really clear and obvious that you got to feed kids if you want them to learn. And guess what? Those Supreme Court cases all say the same thing. Whether they're for free speech or children's rights or against children's rights in one way or another, they all agree that the goal of their governance is such that they want to maintain a school's ability to function properly. Now you have to once again ask yourself this question. What is the function of a school? It is to teach. It is for learning. If kids are hungry, they can't learn. If a kid is sweaty and too hot because a school doesn't have air conditioning, do you know how many schools in America don't have air conditioning? And they need to wear a sleeveless t-shirt, but then one, they're getting indirectly sexualized by their teacher because they're mentioning their shoulders, and two, they're made uncomfortable because now their peers are looking at them, or at least in their mind they are. That kid is not learning effectively. They're really fucking uncomfortable. So you're regulating how a kid wants to express themselves. You've made it harder to learn. You're regulating whether or not a kid deserves food. You're making it harder to learn, right? By getting in the way of kids' rights, you're getting in the way of their learning. That's the quiet part. That the school is lying, that the government is literally just making this system up because they value the smooth operation of their schools over the actual learning, which would come naturally if you were to take better care of these freaking kids. And of course, there's an argument to be made that it is entirely a parent's job to take care of their kid, but not all parents can educate. That is why we have a system of education. That was something that was recognized even when schools literally only taught the Bible in Protestant churches following the pilgrimage of people to the United States, or rather to the North American continent. Schools have a utility that is well valued and provided to families. Not all families can do it for their kids. So the school has to do what it's trying to do. And if a parent isn't able to provide all the food that a kid needs, that should be provided. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Give them life by withholding food that we have plenty of waste of and plenty excess of in the United States. By withholding those things, you are withholding life. That's stupid. So let me be a bit more detailed. Let me talk to you about my experience again with this not having food situation. The worst part was going home and I was hungry. I wanted to eat at lunch. I didn't like sitting with no food in the middle of the lunchroom. I didn't like always having to talk to those adult lunch people and feel really bad and awkward when I'm like, I don't have money. The worst part was going home and having to beg my parents for the money. That was horrible. And it's not like my parents were evil. They weren't evil, but they didn't have the money. And it was a scary, unpleasant conversation to be like, do you have $5, Mom? And my mom would give me that $5. And I know now as an adult that she wouldn't eat lunch that day. Instead, she wouldn't eat lunch for me. And that's just wrong. That's passing the blame. By not feeding kids, you are hurting working class families. This is something that the kids deserve. This is something that the families deserve, something that the parents deserve. It's not that complex. We literally did it. This past 2 years, 1.5 years, $11 billion budget. We fed all of these kids. And we're taking it away because it costs too much, while at the same time approving a $45 billion increase to our military budget. Clearly the money is there, but the priorities aren't. The quiet part is that in the minds of adults, whether it be politicians or school leaders, even some horrible parents, children are not people. All in all, they're just another brick in the wall.
Oh, just bricks in